All right. Um, so Jesus tells a pretty comical joke here about men with no balls to a group of his disciples who are clearly married and most likely have been married for a few years. So they probably have kids. Hey everybody, welcome back to 90 and Out. I'm your host, Timothy Holt, and today we're going to be looking at another speech of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, in preparing for this series of videos going over the speeches of Jesus, I came across some things that I want to touch on before getting into the body of this video. And that is, looking at the speeches, there's not very many. So you can check out the links to the videos covering the Great Commission, where I reconstructed the speech and delivered it, as well as dissected it. You can look at the playlist on the Sermon on the Plain, as well as the Sermon on the Mount. They're slightly different formats, but I do go into a pretty deep dive in both of those sermons. And that's pretty much the extent of these speeches as far as speeches are concerned, what we typically expect out of a speech. A defined audience, group of people, and a speech is being delivered. Those three occurrences are a lot of the speeches. They do serve to change and revolutionize the Western world, and over the last 2,000 years have had a profound impact on societies, as well as mankind as a whole. However, Jesus did talk a lot, but he was a show, not tell kind of guy, and we're going to look at that here. So these videos are going to be covering more of what he said as well as what he did in context to what he said. So when looking at Jesus of Nazareth, we have to ask ourselves, one, was he who he said he was? If the answer is yes, then great. If the answer is no, then he's a raving, lying lunatic. Okay, so let's search for the truth together, and if you use a different English translation of the Christian Bible, so be it. Let me know in the comments. You can tell me what version you use in the comments, what translation. I use a variety. However, most of the time in my videos I use the New King James Version. A lot of that has to do with copyright law. So the other reason is it's pretty easy to read. So let's get to it and look at today. We're going to be talking about guys with no balls. So stay tuned. All right, let's get right to it. Jesus had a sense of humor. I've read this section of Scripture, this section of Mark's biography, multiple times, and it wasn't until recently that somebody pointed out that this was a joke, that you can read it as a joke. And once I saw that, it has changed my view of this section. For the longest time, this particular wording struck me as odd and out of place, and I didn't really get it until somebody pointed out that he's telling a joke. So let's get right to it. I'm going to paraphrase a lot, but if you want to follow along, look at Matthew chapter 19, and we're just going to be covering the first half or so of that chapter. So I'm not a big fan of the verse delineation, but I will give that in the description what verses I'm using. So it starts out with Jesus walking through a town in Galilee, and some religious leaders, Pharisees, come up to him and say, hey, we want to get a divorce. What do you think? Why should we be able to legally divorce our wives? Now, at the time, there's two main thoughts of that. One was you could divorce your wife for pretty much any reason, as long as you wrote her a writ of divorcement, because back in Leviticus, it says if you're unhappy with her, you can, toss her out. Again, paraphrasing, I'll give a reference in Leviticus where that is. I think it's chapter 20, but I'm not sure. And the other was for sexual immorality. Okay, the other rule of thumb or school of thought was if she's a cheater. Commit adultery, then you can give her the old boot and kick her out. And this group of Pharisees are asking Jesus for his opinion. Which side are you on? What do you think? And they are doing this to trap him, basically to trip him up and get him to contradict himself, so they have something to hold against him. All right? Why then did Moses command to give a writ of divorcement and put it away? This is after Jesus says, famously, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. Okay? That is the rule. Now, just like most rules, there are exceptions. We're not going to cover that because I'm getting to the funny part. Because so far this isn't really funny. It's pretty serious business. Okay? Talking about, divorcing your wife and, breaking up a family. I've been through a divorce. It's terrible. It's horrible. I don't recommend it. It leaves a large path of destruction and pain. So if you can get around divorce and work out your differences and come together, that's great. Thus the rule here, right? Jesus establishes the rule. Get married for life. And they push him a little further with the Levitical law and the writ of divorcement clause. And he says, Moses said it because of the hardness of your hearts. Basically, he's saying Moses allowed divorce because you're dirtbags. Okay? And sinful people do sinful things. Okay? So then he clarifies with giving an exception. And he says, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality, remember those two schools of thought that are prevalent at this time, except for immorality, and marries another, commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. Okay, so that's the rule restated with an exception, and the exception is adultery. It's fornication, sexual immorality. This denotes basically having sex with somebody that you're not married to. Okay, and that would be just cause to kick her out. However, that's a pretty small group, okay? If we go to the other record of this event, it says that they went into a house, okay, before the disciples asked this question. Okay, so they're no longer out in the road. They're no longer in the public eye having this discourse on marriage and divorce. They're now private, sitting down for dinner inside of a home. And his disciples, one of them, some people speculate it was Peter, who was married, said, if such is the case, then of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. So in other words, why would you get married to start with if it's this serious of a big flippin' deal? And Jesus answers with something that I find comical. I'm going to paraphrase it because it talks about eunuchs, and most people I know don't know what a eunuch is. So I'm going to paraphrase, okay? So Jesus said, some can accept what I'm about to say, others can't. But you know what? There's 4 groups of people. First group of people. First group of men. They are ballless. They have no balls because they were born that way. They have a birth defect. We can't hold it against them. They're men with no balls. The second group of men that I want to tell you about is men who, by no fault of their own, have no balls. Okay? They just don't have any because somebody else took them away. They just cut them off and castrated them. So they too are still men with no balls. The third group of men, they have no balls because, well, they just choose not to. They're celibate. They just don't want to use their balls, so they pretend they don't have any. they ignore them because they choose to, and they just, want to pretend they have no balls. But you married men who want to use your balls, stay married. Thank you. Have a good day.